Warm greetings to all. Hope everyone is doing well and fine. I hope my voice is audible clearly.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Uh, I, on behalf of the organizers, welcomes you all on today's lecture series. It is said that every crisis comes with an opportunity. The premium utilization of online mode of connectivity is perhaps that opportunity. We have been able to connect with an emeritus professor, Tove Skutnabb-Kangas, way far from Denmark to a remote location in India. I feel myself privileged in introducing Professor Tove, an eminent intellectual whose academic achievements knew no end. She is a doctor in philosophy, University of Roskilde, Denmark. She is a Finnish linguist and educator, and known for coining the term linguicism. That term refers to discrimination based on the language. She had even worked as a scientist in universities of Finland and Denmark. Besides that, she has authored a number of books. Her field of interest include linguistic human rights, minority education, language and power, links between biodiversity and linguistic diversity, multilingualism, language policy, integration, ethnicity, racism, gender issues. She is quite vocal about using the mother tongue as a medium of education. It seems nothing can stop her from raising voices for the marginalized sections of the society. Her consistent efforts towards a cause makes her different from others. Ma'am, it's our proud privilege that you have accepted our invitation, and we are very happy to have you with us for today's lecture. And we need to intimate you that the document that you have sent is being distributed to the participants. Your topic is educating indigenous, tribal, minority, minoritized students using a language that is not their mother tongue. How long have we known that the results are disastrous? What instead? I would like to request the honorable speaker to conclude her talks within 30 minutes so that an open discussion forum can be conducted smoothly. So I would like to stop here and invite Professor Tove to address the gathering. Over to Professor Tove.
Thank you. It is a great honor to speak to all of you. And as you can then see, you have had my paper in writing so that you can follow from that. I will not read all the notes and certainly not the references, but most of the other things. First, my name is Tove, not Tove.
It's 11 hours.
Oh, sorry, that's something that my grandson has put in my computer so that I get up every hour. So, my name is Tove Skutnabb-Kangas. And who am I then? I'm 80 years old. I have two mother tongues, Finnish and Swedish. When I started school in Finland as a 6-year-old in 1946, just after the Second World War, I could choose which of my mother tongues I wanted to have as the language of instruction. My fully bilingual mother chose Finnish. The Finnish medium school was closer to our home than the Swedish medium school. I could understand, speak, read and write Finnish and Swedish when I was 4. My mother started teaching me some Latin very early. She was a single mother with 3 children. She worked more than full time. We were very poor and did not always have enough to eat. But she had had a long formal education. I started learning German as a foreign language in school in grade 6. English started in grade 8 with 2 hours per week as a subject, and continued until the last school year, grade 12, as did Finnish and Swedish and German. And the last 3 years of school, I had chosen to also study Latin as a foreign language. I loved Latin. So English is my 5th language in terms of order of learning. And the 5 years of English in school, 2 hours a week, are the only teaching of English language I have ever had. But a difference is that I was multilingual at a high level when English started in school, and I knew both my mother tongues extremely well. I had never met any English speakers before I started university in 1959. In school, I thought English was ugly, illogical, and completely useless. I still think it is a very illogical language, and that is a fact, but it's useful to know it. Now it is my main professional language, but I do write articles and books also in Finnish and Swedish, something in Danish too. My husband, Robert Philipson, is British, and we speak both English and Swedish at home and mix in words from many other languages. But this shows that under certain circumstances, 5 years of English in school, 2 hours a week, is enough to get one up to the level where I am. Now then, why has Bikram invited me to speak to you? I have written or edited over 50 books and published over 400 book chapters and journal articles in around 60 languages. Much of it is about multilingual, mother tongue-based education. Long ago, I coined the concept linguicism, linguistically based racism, and I may be the first one in the world who started using the concept linguistic human rights, meaning it is not only language rights, but some language rights are also human rights. So linguistic human rights. I also write quite a lot about linguistic and cultural genocide in education. And one of the basic individual linguistic human rights is the right to have one's education, at least during the first many years, minimally 5 years, but preferably much more, using one's mother tongue, or one of them if one has two, as the main teaching language. Now I move to educating Indigenous, tribal, minoritized students, and I use ITM as a short version of Indigenous, tribal, minoritized. So educating these students using a language that is not their mother tongue. UNESCO claimed in a 1953 book that the mother tongue was axiomatically the best language to use for teaching in schools. And axiomatically means that it is so self-evident that one does not even need to prove it. So the mother tongue is axiomatically the best language to use for teaching in schools, UNESCO claimed. And this is absolutely true for all ITM students. In India, this is true for most of the students, even those who speak the country's official languages. Professor Ajit Mohanty, a very good friend, writes about the double divide in India, the hierarchy where languages are organized in 3 tiers with major power gaps between these tiers. The languages that people use or do not use become a basis of their access to resources, the power and privileges. And this is especially important in education. Which languages are used as teaching languages and for how long decides very much of what happens to children later on. Highest in the hierarchy in India is English. So the first divide is between English and all other languages. Next in the hierarchy come the major regional languages. And ITM languages are located in the lowest rungs of power in the sociolinguistic hierarchy. And I'll quote Ajit: the double divide between dominant national colonial languages, the major regional national languages, and the ITM languages seem to create gaps between the declared and the de facto policies in many multilingual countries. As a result, education in these societies perpetuates social inequalities by undue emphasis on the dominant languages and neglect of ITM languages. In India, ITM education does not in practice give the majority of the ITM children the right to mother tongue medium education that the Constitution, Indian Constitution, promises. You all know that. Now, what does research say then about the results of education of ITM children where their mother tongue is not used as the main teaching language for most part of the elementary education, or even not at all, as happens in what we call submersion programs, or if it's used just a couple of years and then one moves to a more dominant language in early exit transitional programs. Now think of Kond-speaking Kui children in Odisha as an example. They are mostly taught in Odia. And if any Kond children are taught in English, the results are similar. At a group level, many children leave school early. And I would like to emphasize that they do not drop out of school. They are pushed out by the wrong teaching language. They do not learn much content because they do not initially understand what the teacher says, if the teacher speaks Odia or English. They do not learn the teaching language at a high level. Their reading and especially writing skills in Odia or English are very much below grade level as a group. They do not develop their mother tongue above everyday language skills, and they do not learn to read and write in their mother tongue. Their general school achievement is very low. They do often not succeed to get to higher education. And Ajit Mohanty's book has, a 2019 book, has a lot of statistics about all this. And it's true for all ITM children at a group level. The children's self-confidence and identity suffer. They are not able to develop their capabilities. And this concept of capability is something that the economics Nobel laureate Amartya Sen has developed. And its application for Indigenous and minority education is something that Ajit Mohanty and I have written about. We have written about mother tongue-based multilingual education as an economic equalizer in India and Nepal. Mother tongue-based multilingual education fights poverty through capability development and identity support. So all this education leads to many negative results for them as adults. ITMs worldwide are overrepresented in statistics about unemployment, suicides, alcoholism and other drugs misuse, violent crimes, including incest, in the number of people in prisons, and so on. You take anything that is negative, and ITM children are, as adults, overrepresented in the statistics. And a similar picture is true all over the world. If you want to see some of that, you could look at my publications with Robert Philipson and Robert Dunbar, who is an international lawyer. And many can be downloaded from my homepage. All this was at a group level. At an individual level, submersion and even early exit transitional models are also disastrous for most ITM children. But a few immigrant minority children are doing well at a group level in a few countries. For instance, Chinese or Japanese or even Indian children in Canada, UK or USA. But in most cases, their parents come from higher middle class and can support them with academic achievements, meaning in terms of social class, they are an exception if we think of ITM children. Those ITM children who succeed do it despite the wrong educational model, not because of it. International research is very much in agreement about all this. We now know the negative results of not teaching ITM children using their mother tongues as the main teaching languages. We also know what should be done. Firstly, we should have mother tongue-based multilingual education with the mother tongue as the main or even only teaching language for minimally the first 5 years of education, preferably much longer. For instance, some big American studies, very big, show that if it is 8 years, the results is better than if it is only 5 years. Secondly, what should be done is good teaching of first a national regional language and then even English as subjects, taught by minimally bilingual, well-trained teachers who know the children's mother tongue. Again, there's massive literature about the positive results of this type of teaching. Then why is it not being done? There are many arguments being used by states, and most of them are wrong, absolutely wrong. In the rest of this paper, I'll only discuss one of them because that's what most people do not know. For the others, I refer you to the literature, which again is massive. I will tell you how long we have known what should be done and what should not be done. And this comes mostly from an invited paper that I gave at a big United Nations conference in Geneva in December 2019, less than a year ago. So how long have we known what should be done? Some of the main causes of the education failure for Indigenous and minority students were correctly diagnosed centuries ago. Indigenous peoples knew the devastating results of submersion programs, where children were taught only through the medium of the dominant language, often English. In the United States, Seneca, an indigenous Seneca chief, Handsome Lake, knew this in the mid-1700s, meaning 270 years ago. Still, these submersion programs, using the dominant language as the only or main teaching language, continue all over the world. And I have a reference to what Handsome Lake said. Churches and educational authorities in the US knew and admitted in 1880 that teaching children for the first several years in their own languages before transferring to English medium gave them better English competence than teaching them in English from the start. And I'll just quote something from it. The American Board of Indian Commissioners wrote in 1880, and I quote, "First teaching the children to read and write in their own language enables them to master English with more ease when they take up that study. A child beginning a 4 years course with a study of Dakota, one of the indigenous languages, would be further advanced in English at the end of the term than one who had not been instructed in Dakota." It is true that by beginning in the Indian tongue, Indian, indigenous, and then putting the students into English studies, our missionaries say that after 3 or 4 years, their English is better than it would have been if they had begun entirely with English. In Canada, for most of the school system's life, though the truth was known to it, the Department of Indian Affairs, after nearly a century of contrary evidence in its own files, still maintained the fiction of care and contended that the schools were operated for the welfare and education of Indian children. These schools represented, and I quote, "a system of persistent neglect and debilitating abuse." Is that true for ITM education in India? Violent in its intention to kill the Indian in the child for the sake of Christian civilization. Finally closed down in 1986, the department and the churches were, and I quote, fully aware of the fact that the schools, and I quote, unfitted many children, abused or not, for life in either Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal communities. The schools produced thousands of individuals incapable of leading healthy lives or contributing positively to their communities. And then we come to India. A government resolution in India, 1904, meaning 115 years ago, described exactly how education should be organized. It recommended using the mother tongue as the main teaching language minimally up to age 13, with English taught as a second language. So I'll say a little bit more about this. A government resolution, a Curzon resolution, was formulated in 1904, expressing serious dissatisfaction with the organization of education in India and blaming Macaulay for the neglect of Indian languages. And this extract that I'll read some parts of shows its present-day relevance and perhaps suggests that post-colonial education and most minority education has failed to learn from earlier experience. The secondary schools it has never been part of the policy of the government to substitute the commercial value which a knowledge of English commands, and the fact that the final examinations of the high schools are conducted in English, because the secondary schools to be subjected to a certain pressure to introduce prematurely both the teaching of English and its use as a medium of education, while for the same reasons the study of the vernacular, meaning the mother tongues, in these schools is liable to be thrust into the background. This tendency, however, requires to be corrected in the interest of sound education. As a general rule, the child should not be allowed to learn English as a language, meaning as a subject, until he has made some progress in the primary stages of instruction and has received a thorough grounding in his mother tongue. Obviously, there were just boys in the school, so it should have obviously be she also. It is equally important that when the teaching of English has begun, it should not be prematurely employed as the medium of instruction in other subjects. Much of the practice, too prevalent in Indian schools, of committing to memory ill-understood phrases and extracts from textbooks or notes may be traced to the scholars having received instruction through the medium of English before their knowledge of the language was sufficient for them to understand what they were taught. The line of division between the use of the vernacular and of English as the medium of instruction should, broadly speaking, be drawn at a minimum age of 13. No scholar in a secondary school should, even then, be allowed to abandon the study of his vernacular, meaning as a subject, which should be kept up until the end of the school course. These 115-year-old recommendations for mother tongue-based multilingual education and the argumentation for them could have been written by the best researchers today on the basis of hundreds of both small and very large-scale studies. Still, the recommendations are not being followed, neither in India nor in many other countries. Then 1953, UNESCO's 1953 book, The Use of the Vernacular Languages in Education, included firm recommendations written by experts on how multilingual education can be best organized. And this was over 65 years ago. Likewise, UNESCO's education position paper in 2003, Education in a Multilingual World, had very good recommendations. Still, most ITM education is today organized against solid scientific evidence of how it should be organized. So we can say that today's choices of the wrong education models is not because of lack of knowledge. Many of us, including my fellow panelists in Geneva at the United Nations Forum, have talked with thousands of minority and indigenous parents and children and their teachers. We have done masses of research. We have written thousands of books and tens of thousands of articles about the theme. And you can look at my big bibliography on my homepage. It has over 7,000 entries, and if you print it out, it's almost 450 pages. It can be downloaded from my homepage. The many solutions are complex and multidisciplinary. There is no one solution that fits all in the details. All good suggestions are context dependent. But still, in general terms, we know what should be done. We have clarified the pedagogical principles that need to be followed. The remaining fewer and fewer counter-arguments against strong models of mother tongue-based multilingual education are political, ideological. They are not scientific. Then I'm asking, are we getting anywhere? Are the principles being followed anywhere? And I quote a few lines from various articles by the South African language planner, Neville Alexander. In a review of achievements in Africa, Neville concludes, and I quote from several pages of his article, "We are not making any progress at all. Most conference resolutions were no more than a recycling exercise. These propositions had been enunciated in one conference after another since the early 1980s. Since the adoption of the Organization for African Unity Charter in 1963, every major conference of African cultural experts and political leaders had solemnly intoned the commitment of the political leadership of the continent to the development and powerful use of the African languages, without any serious attempt at implementing the relevant resolutions. And this has led to the palpable failure of virtually all post-colonial educational systems on the continent, meaning on the whole continent of Africa. What we need is large-scale implementation of the existing good laws, for instance, the Indian Constitution, and the good intentions and recommendations. But the political will for that is mostly lacking. And Neville's analysis stated that politicians are, and I quote, not considering favorably a plan that amounts to no more than a wish list, even if it is based on the most accurate quantitative and qualitative research evidence, end of quote. What Neville thinks politicians need is an analysis of the costs. And some of the hard economic evidence was still lacking in 2006 when Neville wrote all of this. But now much of it exists. Firstly, researchers have shown how massive the economic needs are. As I said earlier, many minority children are being pushed out of school. They do not drop out. The way formal education is organized pushes them out. Most of those who still succeed, and there are some, do not succeed because of how their education is organized, not despite of it. When minority children then, as a result of the wrong choice of educational model, do not get any or get very little formal education. This means incredible wastage, economically and psychologically, because they are not allowed to develop the capabilities that they have. And indigenous people and minorities, especially those whom the education system has alienated, are often, as I have said, overrepresented in several negative statistics. Some of the consequences of the miseducation continue through several generations, as we can see, for instance, in the US and Canada and Australia and New Zealand and so on. And the consequences of this miseducation includes an internalized neo-colonial consciousness, wanting English medium education and thinking that it makes a difference. And all this also increases conflict potential in societies, including so-called negative radicalization of young men and a few young women. For instance, as in the Daesh, ISIS. More than 40 years ago, some of us, for instance, Stephen Castles, wrote to no avail about the ticking time bomb that badly organized minority education implied. We have told the power holders and politicians and educational authorities all this, and still the miseducation continues. And I have some quotes about it in a note. Now the time bombs are exploding. And that is because minorities have not had a choice. A choice would presuppose that parents have research-based knowledge of the long-term consequences of various choices. It would also presuppose the existence of good mother tongue-based multilingual education. And none of this exists in most countries, and certainly not in India. On the other hand, economists have now shown that even the initial direct costs of getting minority education right are minor. And I have some there too. The long-term economic and other gains and benefits of doing it right are huge. The result, if we did what should be done, could be well-educated multilingual people with drive, initiative, creativity, cognitive flexibility, high self-confidence, fewer identity challenges, economic mobility, and willingness and capacity to integrate and participate in public life. And these results have also been shown for many of those who have got the right education. Today's submersion education, also in India, continues to participate in linguistic and cultural genocide, pedagogically, psychologically, culturally, linguistically, and sociologically. And I have given some references there. So you should look at Articles 2b and 2e in the United Nations Genocide Convention for the definitions of genocide. But it's not only indigenous peoples and numerically small minorities that suffer. Their languages and the world's linguistic and cultural diversity suffer, and as a consequence, biodiversity, because biodiversity and linguistic diversity are both correlationally and causally linked, and the climate. And we know what the climate crisis is now. One of the reasons for the climate crisis has to do with not being able to do what needs to be done in terms of biodiversity maintenance and also linguistic and cultural maintenance. Some of the big minorities As you can hear, I'm very pessimistic in my analysis of the state of linguistic human rights in education, and I have left out all the positive examples. Look in my note 14, the example from Odisha. But I am still optimistic in my actions, not in my analysis, but in my actions, hoping against today's realities. So thank you for listening. And the reason for me not participating in the discussion is that my hearing is so bad that I won't be able to hear at least properly what you say anyway. So thank you for listening and goodbye.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm actually sorry to inform that because of some technical issue, the meeting was interrupted, but we had rejoined it. Uh, Thanks a lot, ma'am, for sharing your insightful views. As rightly mentioned, our director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Vikram Keshri Jenna, is a student of yours. And I would like to also share his message to you. Professor Tove, I'm so sorry to pronounce the name wrong. Professor Tove, dear ma'am, I formally and sincerely thank you for accepting the webinar invitation and delivering wonderful insights that I am sure will help young students and others in understanding the contemporary realities around them. My deepest sense of gratitude to you, to your prompt response and humility to help young minds by sharing your insights. I look forward to more such future engagements in the coming. Once again, thank you for all love and affection given by you at Nalsar, Hyderabad. Thank you so much for an outstanding deliberation on Odisha and Odia language particular. As he said, you are the mother of multilingualistic theories. Great and fascinating, and thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, and I'm really sorry that my hearing is so bad.
I also like to thank the organizers, the principals of Jawaharlal Nehru College, Shri Pallav Chakravarti, the organizers include Bikram sir, Sarat Chandra Pradhan, Rudra Narayan Das, and Shubham Das for organizing this webinar. Thanks a lot to all. The meeting is concluded.